Next on Newton Newsmakers, the budget is out, and for the next fiscal year, it's going to cost about $300 million to operate the city of Newton. So what are we getting for our money, and what are we sacrificing? We're talking about the city's priorities with Board of Alderman President Scott Lennon, Newton Public School Superintendent Dr. David Fleischman, Alderman Ruthanne Fuller, and Newton parent and community activist Emily Norton. What sort of a city does $300 million buy you these days? Newton Newsmakers is next.
Newton Newsmakers is made possible through the volunteer production efforts of the employees of mass media and big city publishing, and through the support of Newton residents like you.
Hi and welcome to Newton Newsmakers. I'm Charlie Shapiro. In his budget presentation, Mayor Warren said the City of Newton's budget is more than a math exercise. It's a statement of our priorities as a community. Well, he's right. With a total price tag of $302 million, $171 million of that allocated for the public school system, it's fair to say that Newton's #1 priority continues to be excellence in education. That being said, there's also the challenge of running everything else. Buildings, roads, trash, snow, overall maintenance, debt service, and a lot more. It's quite the balance. To talk about it with us on the program today, Scott Lennon, President of the Newton Board of Aldermen. It's Newton's legislative branch of city government. Also with us, Dr. David Fleischman. Dr. Fleischman is the Superintendent of the Newton Public School System. He's been on the job now for about a year. It's probably been an interesting year. Ruthanne Fuller joined the Board of Aldermen in January of 2010. Alderman Fuller is well known for her work on the Citizens Advisory Committee and now the Financial Audit Subcommittee. She's considered by many to be a go-to person when it comes to questions of the fiscal structure of Newton's city government, so we're going to her in that capacity. And Emily Norton, a Newton parent, community activist, and founder of GreatNewtonSchools.org, which has been featured recently on Boston.com. Emily's motto from the website, and I quote, "I attend school committee meetings so you don't have to," which is actually one of the best slogans I've heard in a while. So thanks for everything that you do as a community activist. But I want to start off with President Scott Lennon for a second. You've had a chance to go through the budget that Mayor Warren presented. As Board of Aldermen President and acting mayor when the mayor's out of town, let's start with you and just talk a little bit about what the fiscal state of the city really is at this time.
Well, first of all, Charlie, thank you for asking me to be here. I snuck in at the last minute while everyone was waiting, as usual. So again, I think on our side, for Ruthanne and myself, we've been trying to do our best for the last year in working on the budget as presented by the mayor's office, and trying to explain on behalf of our colleagues how important it is to be talking about Newton's fiscal state and what we're doing on a year-round basis. I think we've had excellent communication with the mayor's office in terms of what we want to be seeing in the city of Newton in terms of core services. They have been talking to us about what sort of reductions that they wanted to see or what they wanted to do in this upcoming fiscal year. We're at the point right now in the Board of Aldermen where we are just getting the handoff in terms of, when I say that, meaning we just started meeting with all of our committees and the different departmental budgets. We're actually wrapping those up, I think, this week, and really getting into the detail of what the mayor has proposed in terms of what he'd like to see on the city side of the budget for the next fiscal year. So we're right in the throes of it right now. Mm-hmm. I think that all the departments are dealing with some sort of restructuring or some sort of modification to the budget, and that's where we're trying to do the best we can to get to the bottom of that, to ensure that even though there will be reductions in some areas, that we're still providing the core services that the city residents expect.
Okay, and one of the core services, obviously, education, good quality, excellence in our schools. This, I'm not sure how many folks have actually seen this other than folks on the board and government and now whoever's watching this, but this represents about $171 million of taxpayer money. It is the Newton school system, the pride, the joy of Newton, I think it's safe to say. Dr. David Fleischman, you're the superintendent of the schools. What can people expect for the next year or so?
Sure. Charlie, when I took the job 14 months ago, I knew the budget for FY12 was going to be an incredible challenge, and that it was. So early on, you know, it involved learning everything about Newton, its programs, its values, its history, the school's culture. And I think, you know, the budget we put together I think we did the best we could with the resources we had. We would have liked to do more and preserve some more programs. We preserved a lot. When you think of a $4.4 million budget gap, that was huge. We couldn't preserve everything. Do I think there's areas that we can improve in? Yes. Do I think we have the resources to improve in those areas? Largely. And certainly there are things right now we won't be able to preserve, but hopefully, you know, the state budget's not done, so we're optimistic. But I think for the most part, people can expect to see what their students experience now. It'll be similar, because ultimately it's about the student experience. And hopefully we'll be able to get some things back that we weren't able to preserve.
I'd like to turn to Alderman Fuller, Ruthanne Fuller, who's been on the board since January 1st of a year ago, about 15 months. You've really gone through this budget fine-tooth comb at this point. Where is the city of Newton heading right now in terms of how to keep the services that folks really want and be able to pay for them and be able to do the capital improvements that everyone wants and needs? And so how do we balance all of this?
It's a tough job to balance them all, and interestingly, the most important thing that's going on in the city that will affect both the schools and the city side are not in either of these budgets, which is 80% of our costs are related to employee compensation, and we're in the process of negotiating, I think it's 15 out of 16 of the contracts right now, and that, as is appropriate, is happening behind closed doors. But whatever happens with those negotiations will have a very profound effect on maybe next year's budget. Depends on when the contracts are settled. But certainly the next 3 years, contracts are 3-year contracts in the city of Newton. So stay tuned for that, and that will be very important. I think the other thing that we're very aware of on the board side, and I think it's fair to say on the school side as well, while we have the illusion of a balanced budget, the mayor, the superintendent, the president of the board, and the rest of the board members would all say, keep in mind it's an illusion of a balanced budget because there are so many costs that we're still facing that aren't stated in these books. We know to fix all the leaks in our water and sewer pipes, we need $50 million. 46% of our roads are judged to be in poor condition. To fix them would take $8 million. We know we have at least 2 elementary schools that desperately need major renovation or replacement. Each of those, perhaps the superintendent can ballpark it at least $15 million each, and it could easily be north of that. So there are a lot of costs like that that aren't addressed yet that will be important for the city and the schools to face going forward.
So just in that brief time, you just ticked off $88 million worth of
I can add more. We need another $33 million annually for our retiree health care costs.
This is not going well.
No. You can add, yes, right. So they're very real and very large dollars, because as you mentioned right at the outset, we only have a $300 million budget. So you can see what large gap we're really facing.
Emily, Norton is here. You've got a couple of organizations that first of all, tell us about greatnewtonschools.org, and then we can talk about the other stuff that you do. But as a Newton parent, you have,
Sure.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3 boys.
Okay.
I think that counts for like 6 girls.
Okay.
I just like to always say it's 3 boys. I started Great Newton Schools because I was going to school committee meetings and was sharing what I was hearing with my family and friends. And thought that it would be useful to share that with a wider audience. There's a lot of parents, probably all parents in Newton, and even the wider community who are very interested in what's happening with our schools, moved here for our schools, even if you don't have children in the schools anymore, are very proud of our schools. But it's very time consuming to keep track of what's going. And if you just go to 1 or 2 you have no idea what's happening. And so I tried to, the website and the blog are really my take on what I think our strengths are, what I think our weaknesses are, and the way I try to think about it is when I meet someone who just moved to Newton or is thinking of moving to Newton, what is my sort of brain dump for them, and that's what the website is supposed to be, so that in just a few minutes you can get my take on what I think our strengths and weaknesses are, and then also sort of keep people updated on school committee happenings.
How do we balance on the school side of things, just for the moment, all of the things that parents want, prioritize somehow or another with what we can afford, and then balance it with the city? Because there's no right answer to that. And I'm curious what the conversations that you're having are seeing with that, and how Dr. Fleischman might potentially address that, which I know is a huge question.
Yeah, that is a huge question. So I'll just answer what I want, which is to say that I did feel like there's an important gap in people's understanding of what the issues are with our finances. It's very common for people to say, to respond to me or to respond on the blogs or wherever, oh, there's too much administration, cut those high-paid administrators. Whereas we had that, whatever it's called, the Gibson report or whatever, that showed that we're actually light on administration.
About 3% last time I looked. Is that about right, give or take? 2.7,
yeah, I read the Gibson report
2.7,
well.
3%?
So, I mean, that's just an example of where that's an important data gap, because if you think that would solve everything, well, you're just wrong. Also, I know from speaking to our principal that a couple years ago when we had to lay off a number of social workers, people who don't know any better might think, oh, well, why do we need social workers? Well, there's a lot of families in crisis, and now the principals are taking over what the social workers used to be doing, and instead of spending that time supporting teachers, which is what they're supposed to be doing. So that's the kind of thing that's important to know in terms of how we're going to solve our fiscal problems, whereas people, I think, don't really understand how much of our costs are related to personnel and benefits, and that there may be opportunities there for reform. The fact that our healthcare costs are rising at over 10% a year, and that our employees get a much more generous healthcare package than our state workers, federal workers, private sector workers, nonprofit workers. That's an important data point for people to understand if we're going to solve our financial problems. So I try to sort of also educate people in that way.
If we're in a situation right now where all we're doing is chipping away at the foundation of the educational curriculum across the city of Newton over the course of time, does it come down to the fact that roughly 80% of all costs in the city, including the school system, is personnel, actual human beings that are delivering core services? 5% debt service, roughly speaking, leaves us about 15% to do literally everything else. So you can zero-base budget all you want, but if you're only zero-basing 15%, we're never going to get there.
Right. I mean, the other money, of course, is for technology, facilities. I mean, there's not a lot, besides personnel, there's not a lot. That's absolutely right. So then it becomes, how do we deploy our personnel? And that's something we're certainly focusing a lot on in terms of efficiencies. So that's what we tried to do, and we came up with a number of efficiencies in the legal area and the administration area. But as Emily said, you can only come up with so many efficiencies, because we're pretty efficient, because there have been reductions for a while, and we've probably gotten more efficient. So then we have to look at how we deliver the educational program. The challenge is, I think, that parents, we all want to provide more services and programs for our kids. I know that as a parent, and so that's the frustration that parents feel is, gosh, I wish this program was still here, and our job is to kind of make priorities. But I know in recent years that's been hard, because when there are reductions, people feel a real sense of loss. So it's, how do we deploy employees? And obviously, it's already been said about the collective bargaining. That's one area, and then we have to look in other areas, and it's looking at how education is delivered, and that's a real challenge.
So President Lennon, you meet with the mayor, I think every Friday, roughly?
Yep.
So when you're meeting with the mayor and you're trying to get a sense of what the various villages are looking for, and what the city needs as a whole, where are you sensing that he is, and where are you sensing that the board is?
Well, those are all great questions. I'll try to remember all of them, and I'll try to attack them if I can.
Just answer the ones you want.
Yeah, just answer whatever you want.
Backing up to the point about meeting with the mayor every week, that was done at the outset of the mayor's administration, and my taking over a leadership position on the board. We had a common goal to say we want to keep the line of communication open between the administration, the leadership of the legislative branch, just to say that we're, if there are things that we should know about ahead of time, because everybody talks about communication, everybody talks about transparency, everybody talks about you know, we want the bad news to be out there, Charlie. I think it's only fair to citizens that we talk about the good and the bad. That's how you bring people in, you talk about what's going on. I think the mayor's tried to do that in his different town halls. So what we try to do is we're trying to think about short-term business of City Hall, but also looking long-term as to what we should be doing. In terms of your questions about, in those conversations, what do you hear about what the different villages want? I think if you go to all the different villages, a lot of them are going to say the same things. They're going to talk about, I want to see my roads repaired. I want good schools. I want parks that are clean and serviceable. I want play equipment that's helpful. You hear the same messages all throughout all the different villages. You will hear, I'm glad Emily put it on the table earlier, when people do want to approach you, I don't know about Ruthanne, but when people do approach you and want to talk about the school budget, there is this sense that the school budget is somewhat bloated with administration. And I've often used the example that you use. Out of a $170 million budget, you want to lay off 10 high-paid administrators, that's $1 million, okay? It's $170 million. The Gibson report actually did say that we need to restructure our management. So there is this lack of understanding out there that I think is incumbent upon the elected officials and with the help of Great Newton Schools to explain to folks where it is that our money is, how we can spend it most effectively and efficiently, you know, prioritize it and plan. That book that we're reviewing now is not a strategic plan. The superintendent's book is not a strategic plan. We are constantly trying to battle with what we have, try to look X amount of years out.
Charlie, just to comment, the Newton Public Schools do have a strategic plan.
Right. Okay.
So I should
I
just
sat
add,
on it.
I
I
should
sat
add
on
that,
the,
Scott. And also, in terms of restructuring with the Gibson report, that's something I've done this year in terms of restructuring.
I appreciate it, because I sat on the strategic plan for the schools. But what I meant was a citywide strategic plan on where we're going, what our priorities are in terms of, you know, future requests for overrides, whether they be debt exclusion or whether they be operational. We need to do a better job of explaining to people in the city of Newton what we're doing with their money, why, where we're going, and how we're going to pay for it.
Okay, Alderman Full, let's go back to you for a second. Is there anything, couple things that you can think of right now that we really have to do?
I'm going to take a longer term perspective because as Scott indicated, I think we really need a multi-year strategic perspective, and we should be looking out 5 years and taking steps along the way. I think actually the schools in many respects can be a role model for us. The schools, for example, started rethinking a large and important component of their educational program, which is special education. They piloted something for a year, learned what they could, and then are implementing it now. And on the city side, we too need to be piloting new ways of delivering services, whether it's regionalizing, outsourcing, combining departments, and then trying it, testing it, and then moving on in a more efficient and effective manner.
What would be something we could regionalize or outsource that we're not currently doing that would be appropriate?
There's a whole host. You could imagine that some of our health services, potentially some of our dispatching, there's almost everything we do, actually, you could rethink along these lines. So I look to the schools for that. One of the more painful things that the schools did this year that the city has not done is they actually reduced some of their programs and the city has not quite stepped up to do that yet. I think the city will likely have to do that. And I'd add another painful thing that the schools did that the city side has not done yet is that they've instituted many more fees. And I think on the city side, again, we should be looking more seriously whether that is something we want to do, and if so, is it paying as you throw out your trash, for example? So there's these hard choices. We're right on the verge of them, and I think we should be stepping up to the plate, examining them, and making just as our president just said, thinking what are our priorities and laying it out and thinking about the alternatives and moving forward on them.
How many years did it take us to get into this situation?
Fiscal situation in terms
Yeah.
of, like, say, you know, the need for capital improvements. So there's been neglect for X amount of years, and I don't think that it was ever, you know, when I say neglect, an intention of someone, but there were balances and trades made in years past to say, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to do this there? Not understanding the ramification down the road. I mean, I remember when I first got on the board over 10 years ago, there wasn't as much discussion around, you know, planning or capital planning or forecasting or any of those types of things. It was always like, okay, it's this time of year, here's the budget, here's what we have to look at, this is what we like to do in Newton, this is how we're going to do it. You know, it would be like,
Let's sell off another school.
Right. Well, that was in between my start. So the point, but you're right, it probably goes back 20, 30 years, I would say.
Would you say from Prop 2.5?
I think that's fair. That's 81, 82.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's back that far.
But Prop 2.5 didn't tell us to sell our school buildings.
No, but that's how we dealt with we had costs that, to this day, still are rising above, well above 2.5%, 3.5%, and it seems like we were able to cover up by selling off buildings, not maintaining the buildings that we still had, not maintaining our roads, not maintaining our sewer and water pipes, and now here we are getting to pay for all that.
Right.
So if it took us 30 years to get here, how many years does it take us to get out of it?
Well, 38
We'll be dead.
months.
We'll all be dead.
No, I don't think that's
It's very,
quite
very,
right.
very uplifting. Thank you.
I think, remember, we're still in what we hope is the tail end of a recession. As we hopefully come out of that economic cycle, there will be some growth in revenues. As long as we don't expand our program, we'll be able to take some of those revenues and some new development monies that come in and start backfilling on all these things that we've
Can
been
I ask a question about
neglecting.
that? Because I've heard that before, but since we are limited by 2.5, I understand that a better economy could mean more state aid, could mean more, I guess, hotel and meal tax revenues, more interest. I mean, considering the vast majority of our budget comes from our property taxes, which is capped, how are we going to get so much more money even in a good economy?
What you hope is through redevelopment or new development, so that if a Riverside actually comes on or a Chestnut Hill Square, and as people start putting extensions on their home and the mudrooms come along and redo their kitchens, a lot of that new growth can come that way. And you're right, if the state's economy improves, that will help us as well, and the federal for that matter.
Yeah.
Particularly the schools.
And to Charlie's point about, you know, how long will it take for us to get out of this? Well, I think as we were listening last night, there are certain things that could be done and need to prioritize that may give you a quicker payback than other things. You know, for instance, we were talking last night at the water sewer rates, and as Ruthanne mentioned earlier tonight, it's $50 million to get us back to a point where the inflow and infiltration of our pipes would actually be so much less that we would have to pay less, which in turn means that there'd be a greater payback for that in a quicker period of time than maybe just renovating a building's energy efficiency. That could be a 10-year, 15, 20-year payback, where it could be a quicker payback in terms of what we could do to bond the repair of those particular that particular piece of our infrastructure, and it could give us a quicker payback. So again, it comes back to the planning.
That's actually really interesting that someone said this to me the other day and I still don't understand. So by fixing the pipes, how do we save money?
You're saving money by there's less infiltration of dirty water into clean water, less clean water that's going out to be processed out at the MWRA. So if we fix our pipes,
so we're paying for water we're not using because it's
we're paying
leaking.
for water. It's leaking. It's
Gotcha.
bad. It's not ours. It's unaccounted for. We still have to pay. That bill comes due from the MWRA. We're paying for it. Whether we can prove where it is it not? They say, here it is, and we have to pass that assessment plus everything we have to do back onto the backs of the ratepayers, and we're the ratepayers.
Dr. Fleischman, so you've been in the office now, in your office in the position now
10
for
months.
about 10 months. Biggest surprise so far?
I don't think any great surprises. I told you I knew the fiscal situation I was getting into, and every school in Newton is different, and they have a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. People feel great passion for schools. I was really impressed just to, you talked about communication. During a very difficult budget time, it was very civil. People had different opinions, but it was very civil. Coming into Newton, one thing I heard during my entry, this gets to the communication, that there was a lot of kind of tension and to work on civility. And I found people with very different perspectives, and I appreciate that. I enjoy kind of people sharing different perspectives and views, but I generally done in a healthy, constructive way. And that was actually a surprise, because I wasn't sure it would be like that, because people are so passionate about education, and people can have different perspectives, and that's a healthy thing.
Are you disappointed with the level of egg throwing and tomato throwing? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not.
I expected so much more.
Yes, and I'm not saying people don't have passions, but I was impressed by just kind of the overall, and a lot of people deserve credit for that. That's nothing to say it's all easy, Emily, don't worry. You keep us on our toes, and many others. But I generally think we have a good system, and there should be checks and balances and people expressing their opinions.
Emily, what's your website again?
GreatNewtonSchools.org.
Okay, and the other one that you have?
VotersCount.org.
Okay, real quick, 10 seconds. What's that?
Citizens Lobby for Fiscal Restraint on a statewide level.
Okay.
VotersCount.org.
Okay. Do you have a real job, too?
I do. I'm an EPA contractor.
President Scott Lennon of the Newton Board of Aldermen, Dr. David Fleischman, Superintendent of Newton Public Schools, Alderman Ruthanne Fuller, my colleague on the Board of Aldermen, and Emily Norton of a whole bunch of different things. Thank you all for coming in. Very much appreciate it. We'll wrap up with a couple of closing comments after this.
The Angels from the Attic are helping Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation. Let's take a look.
There's lots to do. We made signs, a stand, and now lemonade.
We're open for business.
Help others.
Get your lemonade.
We sold every drop.
To find out more, please get your parents' permission and visit our website.
And thank you.
Before we go, each year dozens of talented producers create hundreds of programs airing here on New TV. This year, at the New TV 20th Anniversary Gala in April, I'm proud to say that this program, Newton Newsmakers, was the recipient of the Community Program of the Year Award. Thank you to the judges and the entire staff of New TV. It's important to remember that even though I might be the face you see on this program, none of this would exist without the volunteer efforts of the fantastic group of people, and I want to make sure we acknowledge them right now. Bob Palmer is our director. Mark Martirosian is on camera. Barbara John is also on camera. Paul Sears on camera and/or audio. Richard Berman helps in a number of different roles. When my son's in town, David helps out. And most importantly to me, my wife Debbie handles the graphic design, the overall look and feel of the show. She also keeps me in line and focused, and believe me, that's a full-time position. The program itself and Program of the Year Award literally would not be possible without the talents of these great volunteers, because there wouldn't be a program. So once again, thank you. And thanks to Whole Foods for sending along a terrific cake with congratulations on it.
Thank you.
Let's have some cake.
Newton Newsmakers is made possible through the volunteer production efforts of the employees of mass media and big city publishing, and through the support of Newton residents like you.